So as we get into the subject of the day, so when I was reading the topic, I was like, there's a lot of jargon in there, and there is need for us to break it down for people so that they understand what we're talking about. One of the most things that I prioritize is that the message reaches where it's supposed to reach. The moment that there's a communication or word barrier, it becomes a problem. So the first thing that we need to do is break down what we're going to discuss here. So my first question is going to be directed to Janet. How do you define accountability and transparency in the context of tertiary institutions, and also explain why these principles are critical in terms of the welfare and academic excellence of students?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dynamite. We hear of transparency and accountability, and it literally almost becomes cliche within various spaces, and that includes civil society, and I'm sure it's also amongst the students' bodies and in tertiary institutions as well. But when we're looking at the two critical, let me first say that there are two critical principles of governance, and we need to embrace them and push for them and promote them and make sure that they've been fostered in all our governance systems. And when we're talking about accountability, I want to believe that when we're looking at tertiary institutions or a society, they are what we call duty bearers or solution holders who make decisions on our behalf. In a democratic society, we would have voted, for example, so that those that we put in offices or in public offices, they do make decisions for us. So we're giving them a lot of power, we're giving them a lot of responsibility, but without checks and balances at some level and taking responsibility, what it means that can become unfettered power and very dangerous power that can be abused. So when we're talking about accountability, we are therefore saying that those that are in public offices, so if you're looking at tertiary institutions, from your chancellor, your vice chancellors, your administrators, the chairpersons of departments or faculties and all, they have a responsibility. And that responsibility is for them to own their decisions and their results or their outcomes on the citizen, on the students. So when they make decisions, they have to be answerable. There must be platforms. So when we're talking about accountability, they must be under scrutiny. And it could be from the students, it could be from those that are funding the students, it could be from the families of the students. They have to be accountable to their decisions. They cannot just make decisions as duty bearers because they have a duty. As solution holders, they hold some of the solutions to the problems that the students will be facing. So they have to be answerable and be able to go under public scrutiny about them and be willing actually to go under public scrutiny. So for me, that is accountability. Take responsibility of the decisions that you make. If you decide to privatize education, tell us. If then a girl drops out of school or cannot make it to tertiary institutions, you should be responsible for that and answer to that. Then the issue of transparency. I always want to use this African proverb. It says that when you're shelling, uchimenya nzungu, for a blind man, you must keep on whistling. So they know you're not eating their nuts. That's the level of transparency that you need. Information must be in the open. You must be open enough for that scrutiny we are talking about. You have to make sure that if you are responsible, you've been put in a public office, you must disclose information requested. You must make sure that every action that you take is in the open. If it's marking exams, I'm sure we're going to hear from the honorable here. She teaches at university. What does transparency mean? Can a student come and say, how did I get this mark? As an example. How did Grace Mugabe get a PhD? Those are just, yes. So you must be able. It must be a transparent process. So processes must be transparent like that. And I believe that those are two critical principles. Not only in any society, I would want to believe, and that is what would then enhance the quality of education, if you're talking about the tertiary institutions, if there's accountability, if there's transparency, we get an opportunity to learn because we then get feedback. We then get that backlash when we have messed up, and we can pivot and we can make things better. We can make lives better for the students. We can also make their welfare better. I would take it that way.
Thank you so much, Janet. And please, let's give her a round of applause. That was so profound, educative, and very informative. But you know, responsibility continues to be a very big word for so many people. And it's only a few people that, that want to take account and responsibility for their actions. So I'm so glad that we have Emmanuel as a young person joining us at this panel. What do you understand in terms of accountability and transparency?
Well, thank you very much for such a question. I think I must start by appreciating the organizers of this platform. It's a platform which actually feeds into the issues we are actually speaking about, issues of accountability. I think it's one of the solutions to what is happening in institutions of higher learning. I'm glad that we have the honorable here, who happens to be the chairperson of the parliamentary portfolio, which is actually the government. So it's a platform which speaks to issues of accountability. We are actually getting time and a platform to register what we feel as students in institutions of higher learning. So back to the question of accountability and transparency. Accountability is, as I understand it, it answers to the issues of taking responsibility as the authorities, also as the leaders of the students. So when we speak of issue of accountability, you know, we recently have a budget that was actually presented by the Minister of Higher and Tertiary and Innovation and Development, Professor Tulengwe. It's a budget which actually addresses our issues in institutions. As a student leader, I believe that we must be able to understand it and actually be able to account as to what and how the amount which was gazetted, which was allocated to higher and tertiary education is being used for. I would like to give a good example of the University of Zimbabwe. Last year, we had 9.6 billion allocated to University of Zimbabwe as an institution from the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, from the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, and that amount was way above the budget of the University of Zimbabwe, which was around 6.3 billion per year. And I am sure you saw the trending issue of University of Zimbabwe SRC taking the university to court. Those were issues of accountability. To say, no, you have been allocated this amount by the ministry, but your budget is 6.3, and you went on to higher tuition. Logically speaking, we were supposed to be learning for free because they had a surplus. But they said that there was a deficit of 30%, but they went on to hike fees with more than 100%. So those issues answers to the question of accountability. As student leaders, we had to account to say, no, as officials, you said you have received this much. As officials, you said from the taxpayers' money, we have this much for the students. Where is it? Where is it benefiting the students? That answers to the question of accountability in my context as a student leader. And then issues of transparency. I think there's only a thin line between transparency and accountability. When we account, we are asking for officials to answer the question of transparency. When there's accountability, when officials account, I'm 100% sure that they are doing a transparent process.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And so as I'm sitting here and looking at your face, Fadzai, I'm seeing something written responsible and accountable and transparent as well. So can you please enlighten us on these three aspects?
Thank you very much, Dynamite. For those who I've taught administrative law, these principles really go to the core of good administration. In fact, our Constitution under Section 68 makes it the responsibility of every single public official, every single administrative authority throughout the country to be accountable, to be transparent, to act in a lawful, reasonable, fair, proportionate manner. And so when someone asks me about being responsible, it's about competence. You've been asked to run the University of Zimbabwe, which happens to be in my constituency. You can't have a situation where students go for years without a functioning borehole and say you're the responsible authority. You can't have a situation where a lecturer is known to be the person who demands sex for grades, and yet they continue to act as the dean of the faculty. You can't have a situation where the dean of students is always approached with student support service questions, and he doesn't respond to them, and he continues as the dean of students. There's a responsibility piece. If you're given a job to do, do it. Do it competently and do it in a manner that is satisfactory to the people you're meant to serve. When we're talking about higher and tertiary education, and I've said this repeatedly to the minister, the most important stakeholder is the student. They're the customer, they are the client, they are, if it was in the corporate world, we'd say customer is king, customer is queen. In the higher and tertiary education setup, we say the student is king, the student is queen. You can't speak of being responsible when dealing or leading a ministry of higher and tertiary education where every single day students are complaining. They're complaining about water, they're complaining about food, they don't have internet, they don't have accommodation, they don't have books, they don't even have a functional toilet. You're not being responsible. And then coming to the accountability piece, you've been given a job to do, go back to the community or the constituency or the target audience you're supposed to serve and tell them, account. Those who've done accounts, books of accounts. You're supposed to present, if it's numbers, if it's an explanation, go back with the information. When I came, this was our strategic objective. Now we are mid-year or mid-semester, this is what I've done. This is what's outstanding. We have failed to do X, Y, Z. We've turned the Great Hall into a museum. This is why we've done it. You have to be able to explain and give reasons. I mean, there was a crisis that happened at Harare Institute of Technology, where students are being asked to pay more fees. And I think the fees were, doubled, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, if you go to the car park, it's just brand new GD6s. Who's accounting for the money they pay? Is the money they pay going to improving their access to accommodation, water, food, or is it going to buying these cars? You have to account and give students information about what's going on. Why are our lecturers the least paid in the entirety of SADC? You can't have a country where your lecturers are the lowest paid everywhere. Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, everywhere. Zimbabwe is right at the bottom. How do you expect those lecturers to be serious when they're teaching you? How do you expect them to focus on the classes they're teaching? How do you expect to run a sensible innovation hub when the lecturer's mind is thinking, I haven't eaten, I don't have school fees for my kids, I can barely survive, I don't have transport to come here, I'm going to moonlight? The accountability piece is missing. And then I think the most important is the transparency, just openness. Being able to do things under the cover of light. Explain to people in clear terms, this is what happened. You can't have a situation where there's a sexual harassment crisis at the university and it's just swept under the carpet. Complaints are raised time and again and it's just quiet. Student representatives don't have elections for 3 years. Nobody is transparent. They ask, they beg, no one says anything. You can't have a situation where truckloads of armed riot police are driven into an institution of higher learning